Welcome back and good morning, everybody. Yesterday we had started talking about some basic concepts to armored warfare, and I just want to thank Lewis for taking the time to jump in and answer some questions I had about the armored combat. I was really overthinking it, and then my buddy at the itinerant hobbyist there on YouTube as well, he also pointed out a couple additional things that will help with this. So let's kind of pick it up from where we were yesterday. Yesterday we had just shot one tank unit to another. Now I was counting this grain hexes here as not in season, and if you look at the beta 3 rules, okay, they're in beta print, but oh, here, let me pull them up. You can get this off the Consim World where all the other beta material is. If you come down to section 14 where it talks about the different terrain types, scroll sorry, scroll it's not a PDF, so just bear with me a moment. All right, it's one of the last things they put in here, but it's talking about grain. When it says it's out of season, then it counts as it's a clear hex, but when it's in season, it does have some special considerations that may or may not affect our combat here, but let's just say if it was, it's really not that bad. Basically, if it's in season, wheeled vehicles pay 2 movement points to enter grain. Everybody else pays 1. One thing I've noticed, and I don't know if it's because of the scale that we're at, but the terrain is not as harsh on movement penalties as I've seen in other games at like the squad level. So that could be more to do with platoon and the fact that, the infantry that only moves like 2 anyway, it's a sense of scale because of scale. So the fact that only wheeled vehicles is affected, and it kind of seems that way on a lot of the different wheeled charts I look at. It's not that harsh. So I'm okay with that. That's fine. So anyway, wheeled vehicles will pay 2 movement. There's no effect to stacking. It doesn't hurt line of sight. So even though it's in season, it's not terribly high. I thought there might be, because if there's infantry in it, they're going to be crawling around to try and get some kind of line of sight benefit, but it doesn't affect line of sight. No effects on overrun. No terrain effect modifiers. There's no close assault penalties. Oh yeah, here it is, spotting. Okay, so not necessarily line of sight, but a spotting check. For infantry type units, spoke too soon, it says an enemy unit must be within 10 hexes. All others are spotted as normally. So that right there, that's the 2 things really that you got to think about with the grain in season. It's just simply infantry, you need to be within 10 hexes to spot. Now, like with cities, you had to be like within 3 to properly spot. With the grain, or like if you're in an clear open hex, you got to be within 20. So grain, it's not that bad actually, and most of the time you're within 10, so it's not terrible. And so going on here, so let's just go back up here. So we actually left off, and I just want to point that out because the grain, and Lewis pointed out that the grain rules were covered here in the beta rules. So I thought I would just mention that, point it out. So I gotta scroll all the way back up here to section 7. So this is where I wanted some clarification on applying the damage result. So apparently I did okay in determining what the result was. It was applying the damage that I wasn't quite sure about, and I wanted some clarification on that. So what I have here, I don't know how well that comes up. Okay, so here in the combat results section, I wonder if I can pull up, I wonder how well I can do it putting simultaneous here. Damage table. I don't know how well you can see this together. It might be fine print. So that's why I'm trying to point this stuff out. I don't know how small or readable this print is on the video you're watching. So, if you want to find those version 3 rules, I might just have to break down and put a link so you can go there. But Consim World, look at Panzerblitz East Front. look for the version 3 rules, download them, and then come to section 7.7, combat results. And this is where I got my results from the table. Now, when I did my math yesterday, I was in the 13 to 15 column, and then roll just about anything, you're going to get a result. That's pretty overwhelming firepower there. It was the X's and the DDs that I wasn't quite sure about how to apply. Because in the rules here, a D just simply means you disrupted. You put a disruption marker. Now, if you put a DD, the double D, any defenders that were already disrupted before the attack, they suffer a step loss. Then all defenders suffer disruption and are marked with a spent disrupted marker. So they're like double disrupted. Then the X, so if you have a number and an X, that's when you apply the step losses, and you got to start applying the step losses evenly throughout the units. And then that's kind of where I started to get kind of confused, because with tanks, you only target one. So like if you have stacked tanks and you target one vehicle, where do those extra hits go? And that's the part I wasn't sure about, because I know like with infantry, a lot of times you target, groups, because you can target, stacks, and when you add up all the modifiers and stuff like that, you're actually have multiple units that you could apply those results to. So let's come back to our table here. What I did on the table is I shot one tank over here at this tank down here, because one, that's the only vehicle in that stack. That's the only one that's going to be affected anyway. Then up here, I had, say, for example, 3 that were stacked. And then I said, well, where do all those extra hits go? They're lost. Okay, so Lewis clarified that for me. If you have vehicles that are stacked, you only attack one. And when that unit is disrupted, damaged, destroyed, that's the only one that's affected. So if I hit with like a 6x, meaning I cause 6 step loss, which is huge, those extra hits are lost. So if that was a full strength unit, I would flip it once for the step loss, and then the second one comes off, and then those 4 are lost. I don't know why I was overthinking that. I was trying to read into the rules more than there needed to be. So I'm hoping nobody else goes through that. But just in case, it's just one unit you shoot at. That once that platoon is wiped out, all the extra hits are lost. Unless we're talking about infantry. We'll do infantry combat another time. So vehicles, it's a lot easier than I made it out to be. Now, when we talk about the spent and disrupted, in the vassal module, there's no spent disrupted marker per se. And since that's the result I had on one of my dice rolls, I think I just had a double D that I rolled. So I put a disrupted and a spent. But there's a better way to do this, and this is what Lewis clarified for me. So I'm actually going to delete that spent and delete that disrupted. Let's come back to the rules. Now, when you put that spent disrupted on it, like if you got the double D, or just a regular disrupted, like if they were already disrupted and you got the disrupted result, you'd put a spent disrupted. If you get the double D, then they go straight to spent disrupted if they were full. If they were already disrupted, they suffer a step loss and then get the spent disrupted. I mean, it does sound a lot, it's bad. Being disrupted and spent is tough. I'll tell you why. Because when you come down here to step 13, scroll. When you go to check for your recovery, and this was something that Lewis pointed out, was if the unit is marked as spent and disrupted, they receive a +3 on their recovery roll. That's important because you have a proficiency number, and I believe elite, it's like the highest proficiency I've seen, is a 9. So on 2 dice, you have to roll under 9. And if you are marked as that spent disrupted, then you have that +3 die roll modifier. That means you got to roll a 6 or less on 2 dice in order to recover fully. And so when I was looking at these different markers, he said that's what the spent, where did it go? Disrupted +3 is for. That's what that marker represents. Because you have that +3 modifier for being spent, and it's just a reminder. So I mean, you could probably, maybe just so you remember, put the spent on it as well. But that +3, the disrupted +3, is just to remind you that when you first go to check, because you're spent, you get that +3 modifier. Now, the other reason why that's important is because when I did my chit poll, the German player drew the op 0, and I activated this unit in that hex. And he shot down here and then caused that unit to get the spent and the disruption. That means when I pull down my cup, for instance, where's my cup? If I pull this next chit, let's hope it's Russian so I can show you. It is. Okay. So now, not only have I pretty much lost that unit this turn, because when you're disrupted, there's really no action you can take except for like defense. If someone goes to attack you, you know, the overrun or close assault. But all you can do is a recovery check. So if I put this OP down here, because that kind of happened in the turn, if he tries to recover, because he's marked as spent, he's going to get that +3 die roll modifier penalty. That I didn't know before, and I hope I explained that well, but that's how I understand it. When you get that spent disrupted in that combat turn, that's going to make it really hard as the receiver of that incoming fire to try and get that unit back up and running. All right, so I hope I covered that well. Now, the other thing too, and this is what Itinerant Hobbyist pointed out, was if you're in, let's pull the rule up here because it's helpful. If you are in a terrain with a positive dice roll modifier to your DRM to DF, I get lost with acronyms, but you receive a -1 on your recovery roll. Exception would be improve positions and hold down markers. Unfortunately, the grain, if I look at grain, I don't think grain gives you a die roll modifier when we talked about it. See, grain, this is an old chart that I found here. So grain, from what I remember reading about it here in the terrain, it doesn't do anything. It just simply blocks line of sight. So even though that guy's in grain, right, there's no terrain effect modifier. So he's not going to get a -1. So if he goes to roll for recovery, he's going to have a 13. Let's see, where is it? Roll 13 here. He's going to have to roll 2 dice. And this is the other thing too Itinerant Hobby pointed out, was a catastrophic result is if you roll a natural dice roll of 12 while trying to recover from disruption, you take a step loss, and then you're marked as spent disrupted. If you're already reduced, it's eliminated. So this is tough. So I'm gonna try this. Let's say, because I drew my chit and I want to try and save this unit in some capacity here, I'm gonna roll my 2 dice. And I roll a 5 and a 1, so that's 6. My 3 penalty. Oh, I gotta look at this scenario. Let's see what their proficiency is for the Soviet player. Efficiency is 7. So if I did not have that penalty, I would be able to recover a little bit. But because I had that penalty, because he got me as marked as spent disrupted, then I got the penalty. Now, let's pop the rules up here. If I made it, okay, so if you succeeded, if I had passed, I failed, but if I had passed, it says if the unit was disrupted, not as spent or disrupted, and you recover, the disrupted marker is removed. All right, but I'm spent disrupted, so that's the next point. If the unit was spent disrupted and recovers, then the unit is marked with a spent marker. So I could get rid of the disruption, but I failed, so I'm going to have to keep both. And then if you fail your recovery roll, it is marked with the spent disrupted. If not, so already marked. So Units may attempt to recover during an operation in which they become disrupted. Oh, may not recover during an operation in which they became disrupted. So that was the only other thing. I wasn't quite sure what that means by an op that you become disrupted in. That's not the full turn, and I didn't try to... I think that might be the only other thing I might be needing some clarification on, because the German fired during his op, so I'm going to put him in the discard, and that was the combat result here, and he was done, and I should mark him with a spent. Okay, so I put spent, and then the Russian player came up, or the Soviet player came up, and this was his op. Because this is his op, he didn't become disrupted during this op, so I don't know if that qualifies him for doing this. I'm not quite sure an example of how you would become disrupted during your op. Maybe, no, not during movement, because you already initiated movement. So that might be something that I might need a little clarification on, is if I could go ahead and try to do my proficiency and try to get rid of that suppression or the disruption on that very next segment. I'm not quite sure what the time scale on that is. So I don't know if that's a legal thing, if I could have tried to recover already. But because I failed my roll anyway, he's still spent and disrupted. Now, the only other thing I'm not sure about is when the turn ends and you start to do your recovery, the administrative phasing stuff, and you get rid of the spent markers. Because this was spent disrupted, I don't know if you keep the disrupted +3, or I'm assuming you do, because the rules don't say to downgrade it to a regular disrupted. So what that tells me is if you get the spent disrupted and you have that +3 penalty on disruption, that carries with you essentially from turn to turn until you can get rid of that. That is pretty devastating, I think. So the rules don't say that when you get rid of the spent marker that you go ahead and get rid of the +3. Because see, in my mind, if you're spent disrupted and you get rid of the spent part, then you're not spent disrupted anymore, you're just disrupted. So my inclination would be to take that off and then put just a regular disrupted, because technically once you remove that spent, and I think that's probably just because of the vassal module and the counters that I have, because they don't have a counter mark, spent disrupted. It's just that +3. So this to me sounds like that would be the correct thing to do. Once you remove the spent, you're no longer marked as a spent disrupted unit. So when you go to check your for recovery, you're just running under a normal disruption and you don't have that +3 penalty. All right, but that's some thoughts and rambling on that. And unless I've really botched something up, I think the only thing that I might need clarification on is when exactly this unit could check to see if he recovers. If it's okay to do it immediately following taking the damage, because that's in his op, not during the German player's op. But if we've got that right, then I think we've covered armored warfare. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start making sure I get prepped up for infantry. And we'll take a look at some infantry next time. They're not too much different, but I'm not very good with odds. I like the armor combat better because it's subtraction. I'm not good with math. All right, so anyway, thanks for watching. And I hope this maybe clarified things a little bit. If you're already an expert or a pro at the game, please provide any feedback or thoughts that you may have on this. If you're new like I am, ask some questions in the comments, or go to Consim World and find the discussion for Panzerblitz East Front and ask your questions there as well. Also, you can go to the Board Game Geek. They do now have the Panzerblitz East Front page up. If you just go and find like Panzerblitz 2, the Hill of Death, they will have some links to the East Front. But East Front does have its own page now. So lots of resources and references for you out there. That's one reason I'm going ahead and really digging into this, because not only does it interest me, but there's a lot of support out there too, even though it's just a beta. So if you have rules questions like I do, there will be somebody who can answer for you. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy it. I encourage you to go check out the beta yourself. Even though it is just a Vassal, I know some people don't like to play the Vassal modules, but it's a good way for you to start looking at the rules, because you can look at the 3rd edition rules and maybe provide some feedback for that as well. So even if you don't want to actually play the game, you can still provide some thought and some input for the development of the next game. All right, so thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.